Okay, so welcome to this week's episode of the Path Less Chosen, the podcast showing the careers they don't teach you about in school. My name's Sol.
And I'm Jamie.
And this week's episode is the 50th episode of the Path Less Chosen. Absolutely buzzing to get into this one, to be honest. A very different episode for both of us, but very much looking forward to what's lined up. Jamie, what can we expect from this episode?
Yeah, no, very much privileged to be reaching 50 episodes. I'm looking forward to kind of having a discussion and looking back on obviously what we've done over nearly a year now, which is amazing that we've kind of lasted this long just working together, to be honest, but also actually putting stuff out into the public domain. So yeah, what we're going to go through today, I think to begin with is, particularly in your case, we're going to look at like kind of a difference that a year makes and 50 episodes make, because I think your journey's come on a massive long way since then. So we're going to reflect on that. And then we're also going to look at what kind of key themes and key takeaways across all of our 49 episodes of guests that we've taken away have been, and how we've actually looked at applying that in our own lives and how other people can apply it in theirs. We're also going to look at kind of general attitudes around careers, etc. these days, which we always like to look upon and wonder why certain people aren't exploring certain career paths. And then finally, we're going to talk about the future of the podcast and the kind of guests we want to be getting on, the kind of conversations we want to be having. So plenty of useful stuff, hopefully. And yeah, I'm looking forward to having a more general conversation.
Absolutely love it. Yeah, so excited for it. And as always, quick little plug is if you are someone who has joined us for the first time, or if you're someone who listens quite regularly, then any sort of interaction on our social media is very appreciated. It helps get the pod out to new people. And on 50 episodes, as we'll speak about at the end, we want to take this pod to the next level. So very much appreciate your support. But in general, thank you so much for your support, which I'm sure we will echo many, many more times over the next 35 to 40 minutes.
Awesome. Yeah, we do indeed. But yeah, I think to get started, as I mentioned on the intro, I think considering we started this podcast and you were actually in the same room, I believe, when we did the very first episode, there's actually a lot that's happened in between. So I think to begin with, over the last 50 episodes, Sol, how was your career path changed?
Yeah, crazy, right? And literally sat in the literal exact same chair that we first shot. Lost a bit of hair in the process, but at the same time, have definitely come on a long way. I was sat here 50 episodes ago thinking that I was heading back to London to do a corporate career, which I ended up doing. And as we say, so ironic that we were talking about the path less chosen. I was very much on a path, very chosen, very laid out for me. But this podcast has been one of the reasons that I was able to sit down and think I spoke to 49, we spoke to 49 people, and each of them was a little reminder to me that I was going and doing something that I wasn't that fascinated in. Jumped into the job in Feb and lasted, I think it was 7.5 months, and every week doing another episode of this. And it was, it got to the point where I was just done and now back sitting in the same chair with my own business and about to launch operations in Dubai, which is pretty cool. So yeah, it feels absolutely bonkers, and also recognised by all the people that I'm bumping into out here who have kind of said it's a bit of a crazy transformation. But yeah, a year, I guess my biggest takeaway from that is you actually completely underestimate what you can do in a year, and I think that's quite a cool thing, and I guess very similar for you, right? How's your year changed?
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think probably when we first started, we were like, well, in the hope that a couple of people listen to this and realise that they're not in their dream career and take a step back, then I can guess we can kind of say that we inspired them to change their career path. But we started by inspiring one of our co-hosts to change his career. So it's always a nice start. But yeah, for me, I think very similar. You know what, I think back when we started this, or even started having conversations around doing the podcast, I think I was in a position where I was actually back home, living with parents, and it was I'd do my masters, but also working on all of the sports stuff on the side. And obviously, the majority of our mates were already in London, working in jobs that they'd worked towards whilst we were still at university. So I think for me, I was in a place where I was like, am I doing the right thing? Kind of questioning it. But the more guests that we've spoken to over the last nearly a year has kind of shown me that you don't have to be in London to kind of start off your career path. There's actually so many different routes and everything that you can go into, which I think has kind of reassured me over the last year or so. And I think during that time, there's been loads of messages, etc., that we've taken from guests that have been really, really interesting and kind of just fascinating to listen to, but also actually that are actually practically applicable and like really relevant to some of the stuff that I've been doing. I know we've spoken to some people in sport, but actually some of my biggest takeaways have been from people outside of the sport space, where the kind of messages they've shared, I've just realised like, yeah, they're absolutely right. Like I shouldn't be feeling this, or I should be doing this, and I think that's obviously where we want to go next, because that has been a lot of the conversations that we've been having and the big impacts it's had on us and hopefully also on listeners. But I think we've got a few key themes, and we kind of always touch upon it now when we come to do our key takeaways at the end of the episode, where we realise, we might have said this before, we might have like kind of repeated ourselves from previous episodes on key takeaways, and I think that is because there are some key lessons and key learnings that everybody that is on a path less chosen or otherwise just however they're approaching their career, they apply, and I think are really important messages. So I know I texted this to you yesterday, but I don't know where you wanted to start, but I think there's so much we can get into. But I don't know what you would find is maybe the most valuable points and takeaways from some of our guests over the last year.
It's crazy. And I was like, yeah, I mean, there's so much to go into. And if you're listening right now, we are going to avoid getting into any cliches or, just the classic ones you've heard. We're going to try and be pretty specific about all the stuff we've heard over 49 episodes. And as we say, like every listen that we have is with an aim to try and inspire or educate, and that's what we started with. So the takeaways for us was such a big, important part. It's so hard to get into them, and again, it's so hard to avoid the cliches. I guess the one thing that I want to pick up from there that you said is first of all, a big thing for both of us is being away from this rush to London, and there's this rush to go to what is the similar path to a lot of people. How did you deal with the rush or going against the grain and going home and not going to London where everyone else of our mates were?
Yeah, well, I think to be honest, like, at university, I always knew that the majority of people were heading to London, and I think in the back of my mind, I probably thought I was destined for that as well, just because there's no getting away from the fact that it is ultimately the kind of business hub. There is a lot going on there, and there's no real surprise that that's where people end up, because it is a hive of activity. If you're going to look for opportunities, that's the place to go. However, I think a few things that our guests have talked about, some of which have ended up in some really cool places in the world, some of which are still being able to work from home, etc., is it's more just an open-mindedness to some of the opportunities and recognizing opportunities that arrive. A few people that we've spoken to have said things along the lines of, if you're in a position where you're proactively going out and seeking opportunities, they're actually a lot more easy to find than you might initially think. There's actually less of a kind of hurdle to reach these opportunities and potential career paths than you might initially think if you are outside of London. And I think that's something that I've massively resonated with. I've loved some of the messages of people that have come on and said, well, actually for me it was just a matter of being flexible. It's not closed off to anything, saying yes to certain things that they might have initially thought this might not get me anywhere, and it's ended up leading somewhere. For example, I'm thinking of the lighting consultant. When we had him on, he made that journey to London to have a conversation with an expert and who ended up being his mentor in the field. And I think for him, that was a one-day trip to London that took him to the hive of activity, brought him an opportunity, and now he's able to set up a business back in his hometown. And I think that's exactly the kind of message that I like to take from there, where yes, you can dabble in London, and that's where maybe you might find that opportunity, but you can take that away. And if you're open-minded to the fact that I don't have to be there, but I can create my own opportunities wherever I might be in the world, or for someone like yourself, so obviously in a foreign country that you love living in, that's a lot cheaper and a lot probably nicer than London, that's for sure, then it's possible. And I think, the message for me around that would just be, like, be open-minded. Don't fall into the trap of, I have to be in London, otherwise my career path is not going to be as exciting or as successful as it would be if I was stuck in Clapham with 99% of everybody else.
Which I can only relate to, right? And I think that's spot on, the open-mindedness, like especially in my story, right? Because if I hadn't have come here 50 episodes ago, and if I hadn't have been like, I'll just give it a crack in Bali and see what happens, then like I wouldn't be in the position I was today 100% if I had gone home. Over the amount of people we've spoken to who have taken opportunities that I guess scare them, like they don't know anyone in a city, they don't know people in another industry, but they just take that jump. And that was another theme that always came up, is just the openness, but then the openness to take the jump and kind of be scared of that unknown aspect. So I think that's one of the things that I found myself, but also you just have no idea what is on the other side of that jump, and that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think that's something I was going to ask you is because one of the key things I wanted to cover is a lot of the people we've spoken to that have ended up leaving a corporate career, which we've spoken to a lot. A lot of our guests have actually initially started in corporate careers, I guess similar to yourself, and then realised that wasn't the path they were destined for, and the opportunities come up to then leave it. But a lot of them have spoken about two particular angles of when to take risks and how to take risks. So I think to throw that back on you, because obviously you've lived that experience and someone who's actually done it. I don't know if you've had some really key learnings or key points that people have brought up around when and how to take those risks and when to make the move away into a more unusual career path.
I mean, I think the first thing that Lucas, literally our last guest, said was about the fact that as long as you keep yourself alive, like nothing really matters other than that. And that really hit a chord with me, because I remember when I left my corporate job that I was disaster planning. I was thinking this could go wrong, this could go wrong. And then you start thinking through things and you start realizing, well, you know, I'm fortunate to go back to my parents. I know not everyone is, but most people are fortunate enough that their parents would house them again. Most people are fortunate enough that they'd be able to just go and pick up a job in a coffee shop. So it's very unlikely that you'll ever go to a point where you zero income. And then if you start disaster planning, because you make these risks a lot bigger than they actually are. And that was one of the things that made me okay quitting my job, is I was like, okay, so if I actually imagine my life in my parents' house, even if I had to pick up like a job where I was earning like £10 an hour, what's actually the worst that can happen? I wake up every day, I work 6 hours in a coffee shop. Like that could be kind of fun, right? Like I could see the joy in that. And that's the first mindset thing I would say with taking any risk, is what is actually the worst that can happen? Because as long as you don't die or get like seriously injured or ill or malnourished, but like if we just say as long as you don't die, then actually there's not actually anything that could happen that is that bad to you. And I guess the other thing is just the fear of judgment. Like I had so many of those random school friends and family friends who were like, it's an awful decision. And I was like, I don't think it is. Like I stayed true to myself with that. So they're the first mindset things that I would say. And then the second thing that I would say is just having a bit of a like money problems are only money solves money problems, and it's impossible to build something or take that risk until you really have like a good idea of financially how you're going to live. And that'd be the other thing that I'd say, is just have a few backup plans as to how you can actually make money. For me, mine was like remote sales, but it genuinely could have been a coffee shop or like refereeing or something like that. So that would be the other thing that I'd say to mitigate the fear of the risk and actually be able to stay afloat. And that's
Yeah, absolutely. I think that comes down to a few different things, but I mean, I think importantly, firstly to point out is definitely what we are not doing here is we're certainly not financial advisors, but the point you raised is massively important there. Like actually, if people are going to leave a corporate job that's paying them quite well in London, that is a massive hurdle, both mindset wise and just like financially wise, to get over the fact that you might be sacrificing a big income to then go into something that's not going to earn you money immediately, which I know is the big risk that you took that of course paid off. And a lot of the guests we've spoken to, it's also paid off. But one thing I wanted to touch on that point around when and how to take the risk is quite a few of our guests have spoken about, if you're doing something that you want to eventually make your career because it's a lot more interesting and you're a lot more passionate about it, then there is nothing holding you back. But just make it a side hustle to begin with. So many of the people that we've spoken to have built stuff up on the side. You know, even probably Phil Kwok, who's one of our most successful guests that we've had on, when he started building up the app before he kind of took the full plunge into it, you know, he was also working in another job, and now look what he's doing. I don't know if anyone that listened to his episode is following him on Instagram, but the stuff that he's doing at the moment is just insane. And there's a lot of guests that are similar to that. A lot of guests have been in jobs that they weren't particularly enjoying, didn't feel passionate about. Their single bank check was coming in at the end of each month. They knew exactly what they were going to earn. Didn't really matter how hard they were going to work. They weren't really incentivized. They knew they weren't on the path to work their 20 years to make it to the top. So they mentally checked out, which is the good time to then, and I'm not advising do your job deliberately badly, but what I am saying is I think a lot of the important messages we've got from guests are the fact that, you can start building up a side hustle while you're still in your job, try and find the time, etc. That can eventually lead to your career path. If you've already got the money coming in from the corporate side of things, why don't you just get some experience on the side, and then eventually if you've built something up enough on the side, you can depart, and that risk has suddenly been massively mitigated against because you've already built the platform and the fundamentals for it, which I think you've done. So I know you got a bit of stick from I don't know if I'm allowed to name the company anymore, but your old company who gave you some stick when you were posting some stuff and talking about like kind of more of an anti-corporate theme, I guess we refer to it as, and actually that's given you the foundation that's probably allowed you to reach the point now, having quit that job so quickly rather than starting from purely scratch, which I think we would advise, and all the guests that we've spoken to would advise, is probably not the when to take the risk if you've got nothing to fall back on. Otherwise then you're starting purely from scratch. But the when and how to take risks is when you've already got a foundation, and how to take that risk is build something up first and then decide when is the right time to give it your everything and go full pelt towards the career path you actually ultimately want.
100%. There's so much in that. I think it is super. I definitely do think it is sensible to build something up on the side. Like I couldn't agree more than that, because you do, like, I had some like not low moments, but I had some tough moments, and I would say like a lot of people listening, that just must be so unappealing as a concept to have. But yeah, I think the cool theme that you said there is another thing that we spoke to a lot of people about was the benefit of networking and reaching out to people, which is, I think, a massive area of expertise for you. But it is so important to be able to actually be fearless and go up to those people. And I think that's probably one of the traits that we see over almost every guest that we've had, over 49 guests, is their like desire to network and meet the right people. So yeah, how do you think networks played a big role in kind of like building a path less chosen?
Yeah. Well, I know you said at the beginning of this episode we weren't going to go cliched, but I actually think our points across networking that we've covered with guests have actually been far from cliched, because we're not looking at it as a broad sense of the word of just networking for the sake of networking. But we've had a few guests come on, and particularly a couple that we've had in the sports space. I remember Unsi spoke about it right in one of our very early episodes, and we've had it since with a couple of people in the sports space. But what I've been fascinated by is people that I've spoken to that, probably if we weren't doing this pod, I would never really have had a conversation with them around their career. But it's amazing to see the kind of same skills and same kind of messages from each industry that are clearly very applicable across all of them. And networking has been a massive part of that, but a very kind of specific type of networking. I think what we've picked up on is, don't just kind of go to an event, don't do any kind of preparation and walk up to someone and say hello, because then no one really knows the direction that conversation is going. But actually, a couple of our guests have mentioned the key theme really is network with like a purpose. Go up to someone and have something either pre-prepared or kind of know what value you can add to them before you can ask them for any help. I think that's such an important takeaway that we've had over many episodes. But if you are going to do it, make sure that there's a good reason that makes them want to talk to you, especially if you're approaching people who are maybe a lot further ahead down the career path that you're after. Every time people have approached these people and they've either picked up mentors or they've found opportunities, it's because they're not just introducing themselves and the people have stood there like, okay, like what do you want me to do? And then you're just asking more generic questions. Like, I think it's not worth saying how did you get into this role? What's your biggest advice? Everybody that reaches out to these people are going to be asking that exact same question. Like, you need to find a way that you can actually stand out for them to lead to opportunity. You need to impress. First impressions, of course, are a massive point, but every time that you're meeting these people or reaching out to them on LinkedIn or just being able to get them to give up 10 minutes of their time to speak to you on the phone, make sure you're going to add something of value that they'll remember, and they'll maybe be more lenient towards giving you an opportunity when something arises than if it was just someone who approached them at an event, introduced themselves and asked them, what would your biggest advice be for me? Because that's too generic, and that's the kind of cliche networking that I think a lot of people think about. And I think hopefully anyone listening to our guests and key themes over the last 50 episodes will have picked up on the fact that that kind of networking just isn't really good enough, particularly when you're exploring a new unusual career path. Find someone who's doing really well in that, and then when you're going to network with them, make sure you give them a good reason to be able to help you in return, rather than just introducing yourself and saying hello, because trust me, they'll get plenty of people that do that, and then they won't remember you after that.
100%. And but I think that maybe even interestingly, this is a topic that me and you slightly disagree on, because my experience from networking is people use networking as an excuse to be productive, and they'll go and do networking for 2 or 3 weeks, or they'll spend a whole weekend networking, and they'll say, oh, that was a really productive weekend. And from what I found in the online business space is, if you don't have a product or a service, or you're not doing certain revenue numbers, then you just don't get a seat at the table. People aren't interested in speaking to you, because there's so many people who are starting their online business that there's this filter, which is, are you actually serious about doing it, or are you just trying to keep busy by doing networking? And I speak to people all the time who try and tell me that they're doing online business, and then you ask them and they're not doing anything. They're just getting in the DMs of all the people who are doing online business and asking questions. So I think there's a real fine balance with networking. I have had amazing opportunities that have come to me through networking, but at the same time, they've been reinforced by the person who I'm networking with, seeing that I am building an amazing product and an amazing business myself. And that means that I get a seat at the table, which a lot of people don't. And I think the number one mistake that people are beginners think is that if they go to a networking event, that's a substitute for actually just working hard and building something, which I think is maybe a cross-purpose thing with us. I'm not sure you are saying that people should just network for the sake of it, but I've experienced the effects of walking into a room, saying I do this, and someone going, okay, I don't give a shit, sort of thing. And I'm being like, okay, nice. Yeah. And just lastly on that, that is definitely in a place like Bali, that's fine. But in a place like Dubai, you're just a little ant to a lot of these people. And it's, working out how you can provide value. But I guess that's what it comes to, right? And that's what you always speak about, is the providing value part.
100%, and that's why definitely not advocating for networking for the sake of it. I'm talking about networking with a purpose, definitely. And I think that comes back to a message which, interesting, when I was looking back through some of our episodes yesterday and all the keynotes I'd made from it, this one was I first wrote down on our very first episode with, of course, my good friend Cal Lee. But the idea of we called it kind of widening the target, but it comes down to making your own luck, which, yes, is a cliche, so I'm going to have to elaborate on it and just make sure I explain that. But so many of our guests have come on, so many of our guests have come on and touched upon the idea. A lot of them have said that all of the opportunities that have come their way, how they've started down a career path, how they've kind of made a decision to go down it, is also because what they would probably, people from the outside would label as a stroke of luck. And actually what these people are quick to justify, and rightly so, because fair play to them, and they deserve all the credit they can because they've been able to kind of produce it for themselves. But it's because of the kind of risks that they have taken. And we've already touched on when and how to take those risks, but a lot of these people, if they hadn't taken those risks, they wouldn't be in the position they are today, doing the career path they've done today. And that's because they're putting themselves in uncomfortable situations. I think that's a really important one people have spoken about, and actually taken kind of leaps of faith where they've thought, if I can put myself in certain environments where I can be meeting people who are obviously successful and in these areas, and again, then employing the tactic of network, I think I'd like to touch on that quickly. That's what's really nice, is all of these things always tend to link into each other. But then that's how you're actually going to go and make your own luck, because if you are in those environments, you're going to end up having conversations that are then going to lead to opportunity that people on the outside will say, oh, that was so lucky that you met them. But that's because you were in that room. Or if it's something proactive through LinkedIn, or giving someone a bell, or literally, for example, some football people turning up at a under 16s game and meeting an agent there that you then end up chatting to. If you hadn't made the effort to turn up, or to make that phone call, to reach out on LinkedIn, you'd rather be playing on the PlayStation rather than sending a few messages on LinkedIn, then you don't have that luck, right? And that comes down to that. I think that's the massive takeaway we've had from so many guests is put yourself in the right place where luck finds you, rather than then you have to go
Spot
out
on.
and just leave it to chance, because that's not fair to tell these people that you've been lucky. They've made that own luck.
Yeah, and the biggest, like one of the most frustrating things that I've had in the last like year, and maybe I think both of me and you also have that, like, oh, they're so lucky thrown at both of us sometimes. And I find that the people that say, oh, you're so lucky, you get so lucky, it is the biggest victim mindset possible, because you fundamentally believe that your actions do not control your outcomes. And I am convinced by the work you do behind the scenes, the work we've both done behind the scenes, they then, like, the tip of the iceberg is that moment where you bump into someone, or the tip of the iceberg is that message that someone responds to and is happy to jump on a call. That is the tip of the iceberg, but no one sees the bottom part of it. And we both know that, like, it's not luck, it's complete calculated, like, risk taking. But for most people it's a luck thing. And every time I hear someone say to me, oh, you were so lucky, or, aren't you fortunate, I go, that person in my head is a victim, and they don't believe that their actions can impact. They don't believe that their actions can impact their outcomes. And once you start getting into that thinking that everything is not to do with what your actions have, then you might as well just sit down and do nothing, because what's the point in doing anything if you don't try and increase that surface area for luck. So I feel very passionately about that I know I've been in conversations where someone goes, oh, Jamie's so lucky because of this, or Jamie's like, isn't he in a great position because of this? And I'm like, no, you don't understand that the 99% of the things you don't see is the 1% outcome that you do see. So very, very frustrating point for me, but I think a cool insight for you to bring up there.
No, you're absolutely right. But I need to point out, I love the fact that we said we're not going to use cliches. We start talking about the iceberg metaphor. But in this situation, in this situation, it is very, very important, because it is probably the best way to sum it up. That's absolutely right. And I think actually one of the things that you brought up there, which was something I wanted to touch on, was the opinions of people around you and what everyone's saying. And a lot of people we've spoken to over the last 49 episodes have touched on the fact that there have been certain opinions and certain influences around them that have really impacted their career path. A lot of people have said that, yes, they're surrounded by a group of friends and people that are working in very specific jobs that we would refer to as the paths more chosen. But I think rather than focusing on like that kind of side of things, I think more of the positive side of things that a lot of our guests have spoken about is the value of, if you have a good support network and good people around you that are kind of promoting what you're doing, encouraging you on what you're doing, then that's made a real difference to the career path that they're able to do. So family, of course, is a massive one. I know we've spoken to a few guests that have said how supportive their families were of everything, how they always like kind of pushed them down. Please do like go and pursue what you really want to do. And I think that's obviously great, because it makes it very easy if your family is supportive of it, but also just a kind of friend environment plus also a professional environment. Because if you're in a group of friends where everyone's kind of doing the same thing, everyone is going to label it as, yep, no, what you're doing is lucky. Everyone's going to try and say, oh no, why are you doing that? I think social media, and you know this very well, so is a great example that once you start putting your name and face, public facing across the social media channel and starting to build up content, to begin with, there's always kind of going to be the backlash, right? Especially with you, I know you won't mind me saying, it was such a stark personality change from someone who probably wasn't the biggest fan of social media at university to going to Bali, and then again, to use a cliche, you found yourself and then started posting social media content. That change, some people were like, well, what the hell's going on here? And then like they ask you the question, like, why are you doing this? What's the point in doing this? And I think you're quite clearly demonstrating already, well, this was the point in doing this, because I'm now able to live in Bali. I've built myself a really good career. And if you hadn't started building it when it was not so good content, and you've always said that like how much your content's improved, but at the start when it wasn't so good,
Is that you saying that my content's improved, or is that me?
I mean, your content's definitely improved, but we don't see any Apple Watch reviews anymore, which is a shame. But like, if you hadn't started doing that right at the very start, you wouldn't be where you are now. And I think also that was because you did have people in your corner, like some of the people you met along the way in Bali and in Australia, etc., that said to you, this is a good thing to be doing. And you met some really like influential people, some of which we've now had on the podcast, from South Africa, from Australia, from Bali. And when I listen to them and you bring them on as guests, I can clearly see why when they were in your corner over there and they were telling you the lifestyle that you could potentially have if you pursued what you wanted to do, then it was definitely going to be worth it. And that's because you had that strong support network, which a lot of our guests have spoken about, and I think is an absolute vital takeaway over the last almost 50 episodes.
I love that, and I think that's obviously something that we touched on in your episode where we went into your story, because the cool thing about what you did is you had that network a bit from school, but like I can even say I was someone who wasn't in your support network when you were doing what you were doing, and I guess an interesting takeaway, what you've learned from the guests and what you've probably learned like from your own journey is how does someone go about building that support network. I think just before, I'm keen to hear your thoughts on that, but Chris Williamson always talks about the lonely period, and I think we've both been through that in different stages where you're grinding and you're hustling, and all of our guests have kind of touched on that point where you're grinding, you're hustling, and you feel that disconnect with the people that were a part of your old life. How did you go about building that? And keen to hear, like, I'm sure loads of people listening right now will also get a lot of value from that.
Yeah, well, I think one thing I could definitely touch on again, which we've covered in detail already, is when you're actually going out and doing the kind of networking with a purpose, which I think in any industry, you're going to end up meeting people who are kind of similar age, similar stage to you that are trying to go down that path that's chosen as well. And I think obviously, to speak from personal experience, it was quite fortunate that I had a few people that I met who were kind of around the early 20s at the time, and obviously we're now the same age, still trying to do certain bits in the sports industry, which of course is very useful because you can kind of lean on them, bounce ideas off them. That's always great. But then of course you have your close friends around university. You have maybe a relationship. You maybe have your family as well. And a lot of the guests that we've had on have always spoken about the fact that they kind of pick and choose who they can run ideas by. And actually, once I know there's a couple of people at university that I became friendly with through different forms, but they were also kind of thinking along the same ideas, and actually finding those people and obviously valuing those relationships, because you kind of know that you'll be able to support each other, and if an opportunity comes up down the line, then you can help them out. We recently had Tom Anderton on the podcast, who I met at university, and again, we would just meet up for coffees and have a chat about the sports industry, which, in some of my other friendship circles, we probably didn't typically do. So it was like finding the right kind of relationships that are then, it doesn't mean sacrificing all your others, because of course it's getting a good and happy balance, right? And obviously making the most of being young at the same time. But if you're speaking with some people and you know that some of your close friends or your partner or your family are going to be very supportive of you, then when you're thinking of making certain decisions, go and talk to them about it rather than talking to people that might say, nah, don't bother taking that risk, or I wouldn't bother doing that, or there's no point in doing that. Pick the ones that will probably support you in doing it, because they're the ones that are most likely to kind of make you take that leap of faith, I think. And that's why if you can identify who those people are within your support network, then you're more likely to feel comfortable in taking that kind of risk or going down that path, really.
And it's funny that you say that, because we keep saying this word risk, or this like going down the path, and don't get me wrong, I see it as a risk. But I think the interesting thing about building your network of people who have done the same thing is it really reduces the actual fact that it's a risk. Like for you, what you were doing, I saw at the time as a risk. I was like, I don't see any like path down that. I'm like confused what you're doing. Is it sensible? And a lot of people said the same for me. Like my parents had no real idea what path I was following, because it wasn't, getting a promotion and going and making my way to being a partner of a consulting firm. So I think it's a super interesting point that you say about, and it comes back to that networking thing, which is surrounding yourself with other people who are a few steps ahead and make the path very, very simple, and getting, mentors that show you how to go step by step by step is really useful. And then actually we go back to that risk, and as long as you build that network full of people, and all of our guests echo this, is once you build that network full of people, it makes what is deemed as a risk a lot less risky, because all you have to do is just follow the steps. And I think you're a great advocate for that.
I think you raised a really interesting point there around risk, and that was something for me that I think was really important that a lot of our guests have spoken about. I mean, I think for me, what I've realised that when people are saying, "Are you taking a risk?" or "That seems like a risky career path," that is literally epitomising what we're trying to do here as a podcast to show that it is possible to go down that route. And when it comes to risk, why are people defining it as a risk? Is it because you don't know the exact salary that you're going to be earning every year, and it's not a typically done path? You know, I can go on Glassdoor and look up what everyone in the corporate jobs in London are all earning. Like, I can know what they're earning, and I guess, okay, well, that's less risky then, because I know exactly what kind of money I'm earning. I know exactly what that career path entails. I know that if I work there for 10 years, I'll get promoted a couple of times, and my salary will now be this. So are people saying, okay, well, this is just a risk, just because you don't really know? It's not as secure, it's not as stable. You know, both of us now are working on quite heavily commission-based jobs, and we don't really know, but like, we could get paid tomorrow, we could get paid in 2 weeks' time, we don't really know. And I guess people see that as more risky. But then that comes down to a big message that a lot of our guests have shared, being like, well, what are your priorities? Is it financial motivation? Because all of the labels that people have attached the risk label to is because of financial reasons that I've just listed there. Why is no one saying, well, it's actually not a risk to their happiness, because that's actually what they're interested in, that's what they're motivated by, that's where their interests lie. So there's no risk there to their happiness at all, because they're going to be able to do something that they really, really want to do. The only risk they're taking is financially motivated. So why don't people just change their perspective? And a lot of our guests have done that and looked at it from a different angle and said, well, you know, I'm pursuing something that I'm interested by, so there's no risk to my happiness. So people that think I'm taking a risk to my bank account, it's irrelevant to me. I think that's such an important point.
And what is more risky, like spending your whole life in a job that pays you well but you hate, or, you know, actually pursuing something that you like? I think that's one of the biggest things for me.
Exactly, yeah. It's just purely definition of risk. I think it's such an important point, and probably a nice place to finish, because like I say, it does epitomise what this podcast is about, to show people that there are more career paths out there that aren't just financially motivated, but actually can lead to a bit of happiness. And I think a weird kind of thing that we've noticed is a lot of people that have ended up pursuing their passions have actually ended up really quite successful and potentially out earning what they would have done had they stayed in the city. But that financial risk they took has led them to far more fulfilling and happy career, really, which is a nice place to finish on our key takeaways before we explore and hopefully give anyone listening a sense of where we're kind of going over the next year, hopefully, which we're going to continue with. But well, hopefully we're going in a good direction, Sol. But what have you kind of got in mind for the podcast moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, we've not even really spoken about this ourselves, because we're both hectic with our own things. But I think for us, it's like the podcast, and we've said this for the last 50 episodes, is it doesn't feel like work. It just feels like we get to chat to cool people and put conversations out there. The opportunities that our guests have had, we've had, it's just like an amazing, genuinely amazing thing to be doing. So I think the first thing is just not stopping it. No matter how busy or stressed we both become, we can definitely keep pushing with it. And then in terms of like, you know, the message, we don't want to change the message. I think another thing we've said is we don't want to just set out and just start getting massive big names on. We just like the authentic part that the podcast brings. So keeping with that message, and yeah, I think it's just it comes back to one of our core traits, which is we know that we'll keep pushing, and if we just stay consistent, then in a year's time, we might be, you know, in the charts of the podcast, all that sort of thing. And I think we both truly believe that will exist if we keep going with that. So that's my thoughts, is I guess we're just going to keep going, keep providing value and keep enjoying the conversations. Is that echoed?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, over a year ago when we first started having the conversation, which was around maybe November time in 2023, and like exploring the possibility of doing a podcast, I think we kind of laid out, you know, what will our priorities be here. And I think for us, it was actually coming back to one of our key takeaways, which was, for us, it's a good network, right? I know we've both had opportunities that have come in our career paths away from the podcast. We've had opportunities that have arisen from guests we've had on, which has been amazing. Like, I couldn't have asked for anything more than that, really, that kind of opportunities that have come from just speaking with certain guests. But we also spoke about the fact that we just want to shine a light on the fact that there's people out there that are doing cool careers that not many people know about. It's not really something that's spoken about lots, and lots of people don't go into it. It's a little bit more niche, it's been a little bit unusual, but they're living really cool lives and doing cool careers that anyone listening, we hope, would think, oh, maybe I'd be good at that, or maybe it's worth me exploring that. And then also we want to show them, how can you go about exploring that, and how can actually you end up going down that career path, which I think I'd like to say we've done that over the first nearly a year of episodes, and I think going forward, exactly, going to echo what you said. Like, we just want to keep going, keep getting on those kind of cool guests. We've been really lucky that some guests that have come on have then led us to new people, because again, they're mixing these circles of other people doing really cool stuff, so they can recommend them. So we would always ask if anyone listening has someone in mind that they think would be really interesting to come on and have a chat. We'd speak very much to normal people that are just doing less normal things, and then we can obviously get them on and allow them to share that. And I think that's what we want to continue doing over the next year.
Yeah, mate, absolutely buzzing to keep going to 100 and beyond. Looking forward to it.
Perfect. Yeah, hopefully that was a useful episode for everyone, and we'll see you for the next episode, where you'll have to hear less of Sol and I talking, which will be quite nice.